Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. This is the first in a series of 3 different workshops that will be held in the coming months called Towards Equity in Architecture. Today, we will be doing the teaching and learning segment. We have a research and practice segment coming up after this one, and then a final on service and engage. My name is Sarah Stevens, and I'm speaking to you today from the traditional stolen, ancestral, and unceded land of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Since we are going to be spending our time talking about pedagogy and teaching, I think it's incredibly important that we acknowledge the longstanding relationships with the land that the Indigenous peoples here in the place now called Vancouver have held and stewarded for so many generations, that we will be learning from this and acknowledging that relationship and trying to cultivate relationships to the places where we are all located. I know that today everyone is coming from all across Canada. There are so many different places that need acknowledgement. So I would ask everyone to spend a moment recognizing the land where they are on. Put it in the chat if you feel so moved. Look it up, native-land.ca. Be in relationship with the place and the people who have stewarded it for so long. Piper, I pass the mic over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Sarah. We're super pleased to have everybody here today. We're very excited about the workshop this evening and the wonderful people who are participating as guests, and as well as all of you who are here as participants for the conversation. This conversation, as Sarah mentioned, is one of 3 workshops, but this is a part of a larger event, which is a part of the Cafe Capital, or the kind of cafe series. The next event for the cafe series will be held at the end of September, beginning of October at Carleton. So the cafe series is the Canadian Architecture Forums on Education. That's what CAFE stands for, and are part of an ongoing outreach project launched in 2019 to discuss and debate the role of architectural education and research in shaping Canada's future. The initiative involves all 12 Canadian schools of architecture and their extended communities. So it's through the CCUSA that this work is being done. And the idea is to kind of mobilize knowledge and to have these conversations across institutions to kind of continue challenging ourselves, as well as growing knowledge and growing practice in meaningful ways. So we're very excited to be hosting this event this evening. And as was mentioned, there's a couple more workshops that are coming up this month. And we hope as well you'll pay kind of attention to when the Cafe Capital, the one that's going to be hosted at Carleton, comes out very shortly. So that information will be shared around, and we hope to see you participate in the other workshops as well, which are asking amazing questions around kind of research and outreach. So this evening, I want to start by quickly introducing the coordination team for the work that's being done here, or been done for this workshop. That includes Sarah Stevens from University of British Columbia, who started us off today, myself representing Carleton University. We also have Tara Bissett, who teaches at the University of Waterloo and the University of Toronto, Jalia Fonseca from the University of Waterloo, Fiona Lim Tung from the University of Waterloo and University of Toronto, Vivian Lee from the University of Toronto. So it's been an amazing group to work with. Super grateful to have put this workshop together and had these conversations around what the syllabus is and the kind of potential avenues of the syllabus and where it can go and how we can improve on these practices that are kind of so commonplace within teaching, and having these meaningful conversations between faculty, community members, and students as well.
We have some fantastic speakers lined up for you today. I'm going to just mention their names and the topics they'll talk about, and then we will roll from here into the PechaKucha presentations. Our first presentation will come from Erica Allen Kim, who's going to speak on constructing and dismantling the syllabus. So thank you, Erica, for being here today. Panise Moyeri will speak on decolonizing the syllabus. So we're very happy to have Panise with us today. Thank you, Panise. And then Brenda Mabel Reed will speak on care, not contract. Brenda, thank you so much for being here today. And finally, Curry Hackett will give a presentation on critical pedagogies. We're grateful that you're here with us today too, Curry.
So very briefly before we kind of launch off into hearing our guests speak, which is really what we want to do, and we really want to engage in those conversations, just to tell you a bit about the format for the evening. So now that we're kind of done the more or less formal introductions, we're going to launch into a kind of PitchAKucha style or format of presentations where our guests will have a chance to talk to these topics around the notion and the kind of question of the syllabus and the potentials of the syllabus, and kind of address that through a short presentation and discussion, which will take approximately kind of 35 to 40 minutes for all 4 presentations. After those presentations, we'll take a quick break. And then upon return, we're going to have breakout rooms that are asking kind of questions that are, related to the topics that are presented by our guests. And so we'll go into breakout rooms. We'll make it so that everybody can move around as they wish. So you can choose which breakout room you go to. If you have any questions or concerns about how to use Zoom breakout rooms, just hang out here afterwards and I'll make sure that I can assign you and put you into a room. It's no problem whatsoever. And so we'll have these kinds of conversations. We have some students here that are taking notes. We also have kind of an active Google Doc that each of you, if you wish to participate and kind of collaborate in writing notes or kind of giving further feedback as well during the conversations, can add to that Google Doc. And those conversations will kind of go in any direction they see fit, so one of us from the coordination team will be there to help facilitate those conversations with our guests. And at the very end, we'll bring everybody back in the room to kind of talk about, we're starting the conversation with what's in a syllabus and ending maybe with saying what is the syllabus and what is the potential of the syllabus as well. So we'll have a 30-minute conversation at the end of the evening, all back in the main space. So don't leave, stick around with us, and we'd love to have you in kind of all parts of the conversation. So wonderful. So I think that we can launch off now into our guest presentation. So Sarah, I hand it back to you.
So our first speaker will be Erica Allen-Kim. Erica, the stage is yours. I will put your bio into the chat so that people can read up on it, but I won't tediously read it slowly out loud because we want to get into the conversation. So thank you, Erica.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Piper. Thanks to everyone for the invitation, for setting up this event. I apologize if there's really loud construction sounds in the background. They're working hard. Okay, everyone sees this? It's good? Okay. So, did you read the syllabus? Because everything's in the syllabus. You just have to check the syllabus. Why no one reads the syllabus? It's so strange. I asked my 13-year-old son what a syllabus is. He's never encountered a syllabus in his life, and he will soon become very familiar with the syllabus. So I tried to explain what the syllabus was, and after a little bit of back and forth and some prompting, he said, "Oh, so it's like a brochure with listed events." And I said, "Kind of. It's kind of like that. That's pretty close." A syllabus for an administrator is a little bit different. It's kind of thought of as a contract of sorts. But for the people who are actually in that teaching and learning space, generally administrators are not, the provost is not sitting there with you while you're learning. It's kind of a different thing. It's contract. There is a contractual kind of quality to it, but it's also a disclaimer, a boilerplate, a schedule, to-do list, reading list, and it sort of speaks with some kind of authority. But what else could a syllabus be? Instead of a contract or a disclaimer, maybe it could be about community standards. Instead of a sort of a set boilerplate, it could be a personalized narrative. Instead of a schedule of this will happen here, 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 maybe it's more about time and punctuated by events. Instead of a to-do list or a reading list, it could be a compass, guidelines, a map, a point of entry for conversation. instead of one clear authority figure, maybe it's a contested space. A syllabus is also a form of writing. It's a text. It's also a genre, a type of writing, and it hopefully can be used as a tool. And so I'm borrowing a lot from a book that I've been reading closely for a bit now called Syllabus, the Remarkable Unremarkable Document That Changes Everything. It was recently published just 2 years ago by William Germano and Kit Nichols. And they describe a syllabus as a design for student work. And I really cannot recommend this book highly enough. It's written in a very accessible, engaging way. There's not a lot of jargon or that kind of like heavy pedagogical theory. It really is written in such a personable tone. And it's also co-authored, which I thought was fascinating. You can't really tell the difference, like who's speaking. So I really appreciated that. But it's a design, and speaking to an audience of a lot of designers and teachers and architects, students of design. I think we understand more or less what design is. So I was asked to talk about the topic of constructing and dismantling the syllabus. And I thought, okay, well, constructing a syllabus, that's really, you know, to build it, right? To build a structure, an idea, thing, or a scaffold. And to dismantle, you know, to sort of take the textbook kind of definition, is to take apart fortifications or to destroy something, to destroy a regime. And I thought, well, maybe we can make a little space in between the constructing and dismantling of deconstructing, right? The sort of taking apart and analyzing. In order to make something, we sort of need to know how it works, what all the different elements are that constitute it. And by deconstructing something and sort of understanding it, we can decide whether we do want to dismantle it, right? So there's this moment of pause and analysis and reflection that has to happen. So here's the syllabus sort of in its kind of exquisite form. This is the template for a U of Daniels undergraduate course, where you can see there's a template with a lot of yellow highlighted text, which is where we're supposed to fill in the blanks. So the syllabus as constructed, it kind of falls into sort of two different categories of content. One is sort of the newspaper, who, what, where, when, why, sort of the facts of the course. And then there's the kind of expectations about behavior, expectations about resources, different kinds of things that the university expects of the student, not really so much what the student expects from the university. And so when you go back to that template, there's all this yellow highlighted text that an instructor, the students don't see this, obviously. The instructors are supposed to read carefully the yellow highlighted text and then sort of unhighlight it and leave it as text or adjust as necessary. And this yellow text is really policies, procedures, and departmental annotations. And so, you know, it's like, how do you calculate the evaluation and the late penalties? There are university assessment and grading practices policies that are, you know, potentially set in stone, right? So there's that liability kind of contractual nature of the syllabus. And you can see that certain things are put in bold, and those are sort of departmental annotations, like really pay attention to this. I know there's so much to pay attention to, but really pay attention to this. Like, it must be returned to students before Sunday, March 14th, 2021, which is the last day to do. So all this like very specific information about, you know, sorry. So that's kind of, you know, what we think of when we prepare a syllabus. But if we want to deconstruct a syllabus, then I sort of see it in kind of four categories of what the syllabus is about and what it can be. And it's really about time, community, tools, and action. So I'm going to go, in the time remaining, go through these kind of quickly, and then in the breakout room, we can talk about it in more detail. So the syllabus deconstructed, when we talk about time, the syllabus is a promise of how we will use our time. And so Germano and Nichols calls this course time. They say, well, there's the chronological time, which is chronos, it's sort of one thing after another, and it's tied to the calendar, but there's also kairos, the chance moment filled with potential. They say, a good syllabus is full of kairos. In designing it, you set up the places, events, exercises, questions where something can happen. And so the syllabus is expressing to students how we're going to use this time and the things that could happen. So if we were to dismantle the syllabus, if we were sort of challenging the syllabus, what would it look like if we were thinking about student-centered time? We'd start to think about setting limits. For example, how many hours should a student actually work on the class outside of class time? It's recommended the number of class hours per week times 2. So if you meet for 2 hours, you expect a student to do 4 hours of work that week, right? Thinking about pacing that's student-centered. Sometimes we have to sprint. We have to return work as quickly as possible. Sometimes it's a relay effect, right? So that cumulative effect, sometimes it's like a bottleneck. Sometimes we're jogging in place. The mind and body need time to think, absorb, and reflect. Also, when we think about student-centered time, the first few weeks are incredibly critical to setting an example for the class, right? Sometimes you don't even talk to a student for 3 or 4 weeks. And a lot of important time has passed and their engagement may be waning. What about community? Well, the syllabus helps establish a space for learning in community. And so instead of thinking about all these policies and appropriate and inappropriate behavior and academic integrity codes, thinking it more of it as a community standard, right? So collectively, socially, what does it mean to be a member of this community? And Germano and Nichols say, they're based in collectivity, which means they're based on trust that everyone will do their share, students and teachers, and that will depend on the same commitment from others, right? So this is sort of a guideline. And so what would student-centered community look like? And I see it sort of around agency, accommodation, and ethics. So in terms of agency, what is the role of the instructor? It's to create conditions for individuals to engage and learn with each other. And so a syllabus should be checked for instructional and institutional blind spots about how students relate to what they learn. Thinking about accommodation, we know sort of the legalese around and the procedures around accommodation, but really it comes down to every student is equally a citizen of this learning community. So a syllabus can also reinforce these community standards around different forms of participation and feedback. So building that into the syllabus, asking how a course can accommodate what learning means for each student, which could be different. And then ethics, a learning community's ethics can include an ethic of quality grounded in respect for fellow students, respect for the instructor, respect for the students. So how can we think about an ethic of quality that informs every aspect of the syllabus and course design, from the schedule and reading list to evaluation? The syllabus also offers tools, right? We talk about course materials, but they're really tools, materials, and methods. Sometimes we even literally call it the instructor's toolkit for, Canvas or Learn or whatever these online learning platforms are. These are materials that are tools for doing things, and everything in your syllabus should have a purpose. So you shouldn't include something if you're not going to use it, because students will notice that you're not using it. They're going to wonder why it's there, and then maybe they won't take it seriously. At the same time, we want to sort of include as everything, the kitchen sink, but we have to also recognize our limitations. A syllabus, a course, a reading list is partial, not just in the sense of being incomplete, but in the sense of directing its audience toward a way of seeing a subject. It's a window, not a monument, at least not here, at least not now. And I really like this idea of a window or a lens or a tool that you do something with it. So student-centered tools, thinking about a reading list where you're really asking what, when, how, and why should something be read, not just because you liked it, right? So we have to always, when we're vetting something, a tool, we have to ask, what do we expect students to do with this tool? You start with objectives when designing an assignment. So what should students be able to do by the end of the course? And then you sort of break it down, what needs to be done in order to complete the final assignment. So everything has to have a purpose, and its purpose needs to be explained to the students. And in my experience, over and over and over again, sort of like we're in week 4, this is what we've done, this is what we're building up to, these are things that we've had challenges with, let's keep going, right? Also thinking about methods, what knowledge does a student bring to the class? We call it prerequisite knowledge, but what knowledge will a student leave with? So we're asking ourselves what we hope the students will leave with. And sometimes they have different methods we can use, like a rubric, to help students understand what is expected and what constitutes excellent work, something they want, an example they want to aim for. And ultimately, these tools are not so they can replicate what we do, but it's for students to create their own projects, to develop their own process, and to evaluate and reflect on their own work, right? Sort of taking the training wheels off, and they figure it out for themselves. finally, these actions, the syllabus motivates people to do things. So we talk about course work. It is labor. We instructors design, we evaluate, we rank, we also lecture, we learn, we study, we do all these other things. Students are really learning, developing, building, and embodying. So again, the syllabus is about helping students do something, which is to discover their reasons for pursuing work this term and why the course matters to them and to the world they know. And I know the other speakers will talk more about that. So what would some student-centered actions be? Reading, more direction, not less. So explain why you've selected a reading and what to look out for. So helpful hints. If the instructors don't even talk about the readings, students are going to stop doing the readings 100%. Writing, thinking about low stakes writing, because writing is thinking and communicating, and there are lots of different forms of writing beyond the essay that students can practice. Students and instructors also need to work on listening, bringing more voices, different voices into the readings, giving space for silence, listening for what is said and unsaid, listening to yourself when you're having a one-on-one tutoring session, asking what are you saying, how are you saying it, how does it sound to the other person, and finally talking. Participation doesn't always come in the form of talking, but often it does, and so recognizing sometimes it won't, asking questions that are open to multiple perspectives, asking questions that open up a discussion to a give and take among students. You really want students talking to each other and not just back to the instructor, and really framing each lecture as a question that calls the students to do something, right? Really focusing on those action words, talking, listening, writing, reading in class and between classes. Finally, because I am very interested in writing, a word about language, the syllabus as a piece of writing is about reading, writing, speaking, making, doing. So tone and word choice matters. And I know there's a lot we can't change, but there are things that we can change in those blank boxes where we can write, and also how we talk about it. So before you deliver your syllabus, read it aloud. How does it sound? Ask yourself that, and ask if you understand what you're saying. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Erica. Really fantastic way to actually start the conversation today about what is in it and how are we thinking about putting it together. So thank you so much for going through that, and definitely looks like an amazing book to look into, as well as a resource for everybody here. So I will move along now. So Panise, I'm very happy to kind of introduce Panise Moeri, who will now speak about decolonizing the syllabus. And so Panise, the floor is yours. We're kind of moving quickly between people, but I will, as we did for Erica, paste Panise's bio in the chat for everybody to have a chance to read. So Panise, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Piper, and thanks, Erica. Thanks, everybody, for organizing this. Huge fan of other people who are speaking tonight, so thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. All right, so I was asked to talk about how to decolonize a syllabus, and quite honestly, I don't know. Like, that's my answer. Let's go home. And so I thought about how to approach this, and I thought, okay, so this is something I've been thinking about for many years. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to just walk you through my experience with architectural education and try to see if there's an answer in what I've done and what I've experienced to this question. And I guess in this instance, I'm going to take syllabus as a stand-in for an intention towards architectural education rather than the document that Erica was kind of talking about. It is not wanting to change. Okay, there we go. So I went to Waterloo for undergrad, and I wasn't a particularly great student in undergrad. I quit several times for many reasons, but there were some things that kept me in school, and two of them I'm going to highlight. One was coming across Tammy, Dr. Gaber. She taught me cultural history in second year, where she changed the course to include content from the world I was from. And then she taught us an elective, an Islamic architecture elective. It was a survey course, and the pictures you see are from the class going to Turkey with her. And, you know, it gave us a place to think critically about content that had not even been a footnote. The next moment was actually Erica's class. I don't know if she remembers, but she taught me in my last term at Waterloo. And she point blank asked me why I was writing a paper about a Scandinavian cemetery when what I actually cared about was this cemetery in Tehran and how it was being used as a political tool. And I didn't realize that had been an option like that, or that it was valid to talk about something that wasn't designed by a big A architect. And so, I mean, I don't know what the first draft was that I actually handed in for that class, but I kept working on it. It actually became the first thing I ever published. Then I went away, wasn't sure what to do, took some time off work, and then came back for master's. And I came with a very serious intention of writing a thesis that was going to be really personal to me about Iranian LGBTQ refugees. And everybody was fantastically supportive. Actually, Anne, who was my supervisor, is here. And but you see, the piles of books that were growing at my desk were all written by white people who had no idea what they were saying. And within 1 week, Tara, who's one of the organizers tonight, actually had us read Ornament Crime in her elective, which she was not endorsing, to be fair, but it really made me angry. And then within the same week, I also read in the book on the right about how Foucault thought the Iranian Revolution was going to be good for the gays. And, you know, I was enraged. So I went to my friends, Amina and Samuel, and I said, we got to do something about this. Like, I know there's things I need to be reading. I don't know where they are, what they are. No one knows to tell me what they are. And this is messed up. And so we founded Treaty Lines Global Stories, which to this day is probably one of the proudest things I've done. We were the group is still ongoing, is an advocacy group for what we at the time called diversifying the curriculum. We didn't have the word decolonize at the time. It wasn't in my vocabulary. I couldn't use that word. I didn't know, but that's what we were after essentially. And, you know, we did a lot. We did a lot of written reviews, talked to a lot of people across Canada, United States, the students. We held exhibits and workshops and things. And we did some writing. You know, we wrote this paper. We did this diagram I quite like. We talked about decentering whiteness and giving everything equal weight. We wrote a report that we handed over to the faculty at Waterloo. And we had recommendations in it that are not bad ideas. You know, we talked about diversifying the content, hiring diversely, reflecting the student body in what you taught, who taught, talk about land-based practices rooted in the land of the place. Teach through building, and all these great ideas that I think are beginnings of answers. But you see, this was in 2016 up to 18, and I am jaded. Like, I am not as optimistic as I was when we were starting this work. And I'll tell you, I am currently an intern architect. I am working towards getting licensed, practicing. And I just came off of teaching third year studio at Laurentian. These are some of my students with their design build projects. So in existing at this intersection, I keep finding myself asking the question, why the heck are we actually doing in architectural education? Like, what is the point of architectural education? Are we trying to teach people how to detail windows and become fully fledged practitioners walking out of school? Or are we trying to get them to theorize about the window and the concept of a window and think critically? And there's a balance. I think we can all agree, right? There's so much content you need to learn as an architect. You will never be done. But I think we can all agree a good chunk of the education is teaching people to think. And so let's say theoretically, we figure out a way to decolonize this way of thinking in school. What does that even mean when we then release the students into practice? Where I'm not gonna lie, 90% of my time is spent yelling at city employees about sizes of bike racks. Like, how is that going to come in play? Like, the closest you get to decolonizing is DEI committees in corporate settings, which I think, and many of us would agree, are performative kind of capitalist endeavors that I have many opinions about. So, and the other question is, even if we found a way to figure out how to decolonize, let's say, can you even do that in a settler colonialist society that is foundationally based in racism And in institutions that center whiteness, and like Eric was just talking about the contract of the syllabus, we're marking students, we're preparing them to go into the capitalist world and compete. Like, that is the setup. Can you decolonize that setup? Like, I personally think we would have to like completely dismantle everything. And I don't know if that's an option. So all of this, sorry if this is not what you were looking for, but it takes me back to the highlights of when my education worked for me. And I think the success were in moments that went beyond representation and diversity, which are important, like by all means, right? But I think if you knew Andrew Levitt, I think he would have called it centering empathy. And I don't know what that means, but I know it's not just about empathizing with the marginalized, but it's also about the privileged. It's as important. And we can talk about it in the breakout group, what that means, but that's the closest answer I can come up with. And I think it actually maybe Brenda has some answers in her talk about care, but I think that's where I'm going to leave you. Hopefully this was okay. Thank you.
Oh, I think that was great. I mean, if the questions were easy, we wouldn't need to have a workshop on them. So I think it's really important to bring up the hard questions. So thank you for that, Penise. Brenda, we're really happy to hear from you next. I will post your bio in the chat so people can learn a little bit more about you. Take it away.
Okay, so share screen. I can see everyone still, so that's good. Okay, so I've been asked to talk about care, not contract. So first I want to address this idea of the syllabus as a contract. Oh, here we go. So the syllabus is not a contract. While they're spoken about and used in post-secondary institutions, they're really not contracts at all. At best, they are roadmaps of a course, and at worst, they are protective documents for professors. A contract implies that the parties involved have reached mutual ground, understanding, and have agreed to the terms. A syllabus is no such thing. If it's more like a user agreement, I'd argue that most students aren't aware that that's what it is. The instructor sets all the terms except the university's policies and typically presents it on the first day of class. The contract is assumed agreeable by the student's continued enrollment, regardless of the fact that it may be a required credit. To speak about care in a syllabus, educators need to first recognize the power they hold. All care relationships involve a power imbalance, which is challenging to handle well. As Joan Toronto and Bernice Fisher have established, care has a cost, and it requires resources such as time, finances, materials, etc. And I'll add emotional labor to this list. When I think about care in the syllabus, I think it's important to remember the real goal of the course of education, which is to facilitate learning. So the big question is, how is the syllabus constructed to put the students first? How does it address varying needs of students? To speak of care, not contract, we need to understand that in our society, we heavily rely on justice principles, which are disconnected from individual circumstances and are universally applied. It's essentially how the syllabus is constructed, as if every student is the same and deviation from the structure is abnormal. Care is situated in the very concrete, in the specifics, and cannot exist in the abstract. So if you want to address care in the syllabus, some radical rethinking is necessary. Care, existing in the imbalance of power, is often top-down. Care can be and is regularly, quotes, done without consent and without communication. In the case of the syllabus, this kind of care doesn't make sense, and it leads to assumptions, misplaced energy, and frustration. And also say an instructor's intention is not more important than a student's reception. Communication is critical to a care-based syllabus, and the two main areas I want to get into briefly are flexibility and transparency. To start, I'll just list a few things that I think really get in the way of actual learning: a focus on production and technical completion, overall strictness that's based on fear, overlapping, clustered, or a multitude of deadlines, comparative numerical marking. On the last note, I remember my professor, Bill Woodworth, once saying, and I'm paraphrasing here, "How can I grade you in your process of learning?" So on flexibility and transparency, there are alternative course structures with more transparency and flexibility than typical. Specification grading gives students predetermined routes to specific grades that are based on pass-fail assignments. I would love to see even more radical pass-fail systems. Although not perfect, they alleviate comparative marking problems, make space for experimentation, and allow students to manage their time individually. We already say, you get out what you put into it. So why can't we make that a way of framing courses? The CARE syllabus needs to focus on the big objective, learning, and build a flexible enough structure that students can navigate it collectively and individually. There needs to be room for communication between students and teachers to quote unquote course correct during the term. This needs to be clearly stated in ways that students can act on them. It's not feasible for all students to approach a professor with their needs. Thinking in multitudes is a good place to start for thinking about addressing needs. How, through multiple paths, can a student complete a course or communicate needs? Perhaps in this context of communication, negotiation, and care, a real contract between students and professors could be achieved to produce a more caring course that focuses on student learning, a document that carefully and specifically lays out the class and its flexibility, one that can be negotiated, one that changes due to the needs of students year to year, one that gives options to students. To conclude, I'd like to quote Joan Toronto, who is talking about architects, but it applies to all the same to teachers. The point is not that contemporary architects and planners are all uncaring. The point is that they are caring wrongly. They are caring about things, and often the wrong things. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brenda. These short presentations are like really wonderfully impactful with and so tight. So thank you so much. I think that was wonderful to reflect on. So I'm moving on to our next presentation because I would love to keep talking to each of the presenters, but I know we need to get to the breakout rooms. So Curry Hackett, super happy to introduce Curry to everybody here who'll be speaking about critical pedagogy. So Curry, you can take it away.
Evening, everyone. Again, I'm Curry Hackett. Calling from the unceded land of East Cherokee, Shawnee, and Yuchi peoples. Currently, we refer to that area as Knoxville, Tennessee. I'm calling actually from New York City at the moment. But can you all see this? What I'm showing, by the way? Great, perfect. So super excited to share my work with you all today, or share a little bit of work, sort of how we're putting some of these strategies that some of my peers here are lifting up in practice. Just a little bit of background on me. When I kind of talk about my entry point into the profession, I tend to be a little bit autobiographical and just kind of talk about my upbringing in this small town in Virginia called Prospect, outside of Farmville, Virginia, so 2 small dots in Southern Virginia. And I grew up in a small town. I grew up on our sort of ancestral farmland that we've had in our family for about 100 years, and just grew just really close to the land, and have a lot of kind of rich anecdotes. In this case, my great uncle helping me feed the chickens, and my mom always kind of keeping us, my sister and I, abreast of what sort of historically happened on that land, and just sort of always imbuing the land with meaning. I left Farmville Prospect to attend Howard University in Washington, D.C., which is a historically and predominantly Black institution founded just a couple of years after the American Civil War. And so Howard was this similarly kind of special place, kind of in the nation's capital, where you have all these, it was a very kind of diasporic experience, right? So you have Africans, Caribbeans, Black folks from all four corners of the states kind of colliding and creating this really, really kind of spectacular display of cultural production. And so, you know, for me, it was just like this amazing kind of place where we could start to think of these two areas as Black landscapes. And I sort of define those as places or architectures or landscapes that are built kind of for and by Black folks. And so like I've been recently started to trying to unpack what that means for the discipline, what that can mean in terms of like how we qualify and describe and produce architecture. What does that mean for the canon of architecture? What are these kind of architectures of the everyday? Like how can we find value and lift those up into the discipline and into the classroom, into studio? So I've just been having a lot of fun and just kind of engaging those aspects of my past and like sort of trying to imbue sort of engender modes of teaching and getting the students to like learn on their own terms and understanding architecture generally in kind of softer, more pliable terms. That this has all kind of come to a head and as of 2020 and as through the sort of my membership in the emergent sort of anti-racist sort of alternative design school, Dark Matter University. And so I actually had the pleasure of piloting a brand new course. It was our first studio at Carleton. So I co-taught that with Jaleesa Bloomberg. It was a course in partnership with Carleton, as well as another course, Fugitive Practice, which I co-taught with Jerome Hayford, which partnered Yale and Howard in the first iteration. And then we just wrapped up Yale and a City College here in New York in the second iteration. And so both of these courses are kind of trying to embody these values that DMU sort of aspires to, which is new forms of knowledge production, new forms of practice. And so in both of these cases, and these are obviously the syllabi for those two courses, we were trying to kind of borrow and try to legitimize the production of material culture, production of Black material culture, and sort of trying to unpack and broaden, again, like the representations of architecture. In the studio in particular, we were looking at Black means of performance, right? And just trying to get the students to like develop through their own notational strategies to unpack the sort of socio-spatial patterns of Black performance. So here we have Double Dutch, this sort of regional dance from DC called Go-Go. Beating Your Feet. And then similarly in Fugitive Practice, we were kind of looking at the ways that Black folks sort of take and refirm and shape space through making, in addition to performance. So in this case, like we have students actually going out in the world and creating these kind of one-to-one sort of full-scale constructions. You know, all of these, throughout all of this, we were having a lot of fun just getting folks to think really, really, getting the students to work really collaboratively, getting them to kind of challenge their own assumptions about like what architecture can be, where their place can be in the discipline, how do they start to see themselves in their work, in particular for students of various marginalized identities. And at the end, you know, we often were trying to sort of set up this relationship between the individual contributions and collective output. And those courses ultimately are informing even my kind of more current syllabi at University of Tennessee in Knoxville. So I taught a seminar and a studio this year. So Subjective Landscapes was looking at kind of embodied and personal means of mapping and cartography. And then the Subjective Waters was looking at kind of taking inspiration from Black cultural references to water to try to get us to think more fluidly or about things like program So just kind of really encouraging sort of like leaky edges and slippery sort of programmatic conditions, if you will. I'll just kind of run through a little bit of some of the work from the studio just to kind of like put some of these ideas in practice or in context. And so we began the studio using collage, like extensive use of collage to try to sort of image these really subjective narratives. We started actually with a Spotify playlist and get them to like think about to try to use collage to spatialize the narratives that they were lifting out of those songs. And so, you know, I think using collage not only as a representational tool that's kind of liberated from Cartesian scale and proportion, but even thinking about collage as a kind of attitude or a sensibility. And so from this part of the exercise, where as you can see, they're kind of abstract and kind of speculative, but also kind of uncannily familiar and nostalgic, they actually started to bring these ideas out of the abstract and start to map them onto sort of an actual architectural conditions. And so the class began to endeavor on this collective project in which we were imagining a 300-person neighborhood inspired by a kind of post-renewal landscape. And so the students were kind of building an axon or drawing an axon, cutting them, bouncing in and out of the software, just really kind of trying to encourage a really messy, embracing messiness and informality, but just kind of encouraging this sort of superpositional way of working. These are photos from the final review, which was just this past Friday. So we ultimately ended up in this sort of 7-foot by 7-foot collective drawing in which the class was divided into 3 groups. And they kind of puzzled together their 3 chunks of this sort of speculative neighborhood that we created. And even in the final review, right, I'm trying to challenge traditional sort of single nodes of knowledge production, right, where we, instead of having 14 discrete projects, right, or as I described it almost weekly to the students, instead of 14 individual projects, thinking of each student as contributing at least 1/14 of a sort of broader collective project. And so this was, so even in the final review, we're like not necessarily like going down the line, right, and like and commenting on a sort of fixed product or a final outcome, but actually keeping the production of knowledge fluid and keeping that as part of the actual process, part of the actual review format. So for about the last third of the review, after the kind of presentations, just invited audience members, students, faculty, anyone who was in the room to pass out Post-it notes and pens, and just sort of invited them to sort of plaster and pepper the wall with ideas or questions or additional thoughts that the drawing sort of evoked from the crowd. And then we sort of finished with a salon, right, about these sort of this new sort of collective idea. So again, just generally have been sort of enrolling the class, I guess, in this sort of attitude of seeing the work, especially in school, particularly in school, as you know, just recognizing that it's a place of learning, active learning, and just kind of getting them to see themselves and their work as sort of works in progress. And at the same time, getting them to sort of find value in their own work, find value in their peers' work, and kind of reach beyond themselves to as we were saying, sort of finding as opposed to proposing aesthetics and spatial narratives. So hopefully that that gives a bit of insight to what we've been up to, what I've been up to, and how I've been putting some of the ideas that I think I certainly in dialogue with some of my peers here in practice. So thank you all.
Thanks so much, Curry. Really amazing work, and having been at Carleton and seen the work that you've done at those studios as well. It's so great to see this work continuing through so many different places and different universities as well, because it's extremely important. So thank you very much for sharing that. It's really incredible. So thank you to all our guests. That was like an amazing 40 minutes of like discussion, and there's like so much to think about.
Just to say thank you for these great conversations. Thank you everyone for participating. The next couple of events are coming up, so be watching for more on these. On May 20th is the research and practice session, and then on May 27th, the service and engage session. So some more fascinating conversations. If you like this one, come back for more. And thanks again to all the presenters, organizers, the volunteers who are taking notes for us in the sessions today. We will compile this into some wonderful document to share with everyone at a future date.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, it's been a huge pleasure to have everybody here and have these conversations. I know it's just the start. This is ongoing, but hopefully you can kind of walk away with some new kind of thoughts and questions around this and connect with individuals as well in this group. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, organizing team. Lisa Landrum as well. Thank you very much for starting the cafe events and working through this, and Anne Bordelot, who also kind of worked on kind of engaging with the funding on behalf of CCUSA. So these events were only possible with those efforts, and we're very excited. And so thank you again. I want to echo that to our guests. Incredibly important conversations, and thank you for sharing your work and your thoughts and your research. And I hope that we can continue speaking in the future. So please, yes, sign up for the next event. There's a link in the chat where you can sign up for those Zoom workshops. So